I'm your host, not for possession, Narcissa Deville, and welcome to hell. A few years ago, I believe it was on Draco Malfoy's 35th birthday, a fan tweeted at J.K. Rowling, tagging her in the fact that it was his birthday. J.K. Rowling responded with, "I'm not invited because I don't understand why people are so in love with him." And honestly, this is pretty indicative for her attitude towards Draco Malfoy for a long time now, and one of my many problems with her. I mentioned in the Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore video that part of my issue with J.K. Rowling and her treatment of Draco Malfoy has everything to do with his age and the fact that a lot of shitty adults in Harry's life got a pass while Draco Malfoy specifically did not. Whatever your feelings about Snape, and I know that the discourse surrounding him is a lot, regardless of your personal feelings, you have to acknowledge that he was a pretty shitty adult to Harry, mostly because he couldn't see past his own blinding hatred of Harry's father in order to treat Harry like a decent human being. And hold on to that because it will come up later. And if you look at the epilogue, and honestly, I could do a whole deep dive just into that shit show, Harry actually has named one of his children Albus Severus Potter after arguably two of the worst adults in Harry's life. I'd like to believe that maybe this represents the idea of Harry's forgiveness of the people who treated him terribly. He grew up, went to therapy, and learned that holding on to his past was ultimately holding him back, and that he could be a better person if he learned to forgive the people who hurt him. And we almost get a hint of that with the epilogue and his little nod of the head to Draco Malfoy at the end. And then Cursed Child comes along and totally derails that. Honestly, one of my biggest problems with that play is just the absolute two-finger salute it decides to give to everything that the books have built up for the last 7 years. I guess that should have been a red flag of what was to come, but we were young and innocent, and J.K. Rowling was less bad? Maybe? I don't know. I already did a video on my thoughts about Cursed Child, so I'll try not to get too deep into that, but what I will say is that it just proves my theory. Throughout the story, Draco and Harry's rivalry continues to live on so much that Harry is reticent to even trust Scorpius because of his father and what he represents, and eventually considers Scorpius to be a bad influence and literally will not let Scorpius and Albus be friends anymore, which is like, what even is this? Ironically, Harry's treatment of Scorpius in this way is not unlike Severus's treatment of Harry because of his hatred of James. The difference, I guess, being that it's okay when Harry does it because, you know, he's the ultimate good guy who can do no wrong. And this isn't to say that I have any animosity towards Harry. I think my love for him is pretty evident in all of my fanfics about him and Draco. But there is something to be said about the fact that his shitty behavior has often been excusable, while other people doing bad things is like, they are the devil. And I guess to the extent that the story is written from Harry's perspective, that makes sense. He wouldn't necessarily have the introspective ability to say, hey, you know what, I was kind of a dick to this person growing up. Draco definitely held his own throughout their school years, but honestly, in Half-Blood Prince, I kind of feel like Harry deserved to get his nose broken for being a stalker. He basically decided that Draco was evil, stalked him while literally all of his friends told him not to, and then it turns out, wow, Draco was doing something bad, I was right, and then Harry almost kills him, but it's okay in the end because he kind of feels bad about it? Yikes. But all of that ultimately is forgivable because Harry is Harry and Draco is a Death Eater, so nothing else matters. Nuance doesn't matter. The fact that they're both young children fighting in a war that neither of them asked for is irrelevant. And yet, ultimately, even Voldemort is worth something of a redemption arc because he was born under a love potion and can't feel love or understand love. And honestly, okay, that's a load of shit. The only adult who doesn't get something of a redemption arc is Rita Skeeter, who is trapped as a bug for a hot minute, so that's a thing. And then like Umbridge, who like dies, I think, or something. Ultimately, Dumbledore, Snape, the Dursleys, they all get a pass. Because no matter how horrible they were to Harry, no matter what they did or how badly they treated him, they could never be as bad as a young boy who clearly just wanted a friend, and yeah, was a little pretentious and a bit of a brat and a bit of an ass, but here we are. I think if you take the epilogue at face value and take that as the true and proper end of the series, which is not my favorite, but it's better than Cursed Child, then that actually speaks a lot to Harry's growth. It suggests that despite everything, maybe Harry was able to forgive Draco, and that there is a possibility for, if not friendship, at least cordialness. It's a sign that at the very least, he is a proper adult and not a child playing dress up as an adult, as seems to be the case in Cursed Child. There's a hope that maybe, just maybe, things have changed for the better. I've said it before, but Draco deserves a redemption arc, not because I like him or because I think the actor is good looking, but because people can change. If anything, the story of Harry Potter is in many ways the idea that who you are is not based on who you were raised by or your circumstances. Harry was raised by a very toxic family with their own very toxic ideas about magic, and he just as easily could have rejected the magical world outright. Sirius Black was raised with his own toxic influences of a dark and ancient pureblood family, and honestly, he could have just as easily followed in the footsteps of his cousin-in-law, Lucius Malfoy, and yet he didn't. Despite the rhetoric he canonically grew up hearing and understanding, he was allowed to be better. He was allowed to grow and change as a person. He was allowed to know that what they were saying was wrong. Draco never gets this opportunity. It seems clear to me that he didn't really believe in what his parents pushed on him, most especially his father, because if he had, he wouldn't have lied to his aunt about knowing it was Harry in Deathly Hallows. He knew it was Harry. They spent years obsessed with one another. There was no way he couldn't have known, and yet he said he wasn't sure, and ultimately Harry was able to get away. Moreover, it's clear that Narcissa didn't believe in the same things her husband did towards the end because she lied and saved Harry's life. I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like to not even feel safe in your own home, to have your father end up in prison, which secretly maybe Draco even enjoyed for a minute, only to have him come home and end up with Voldemort living in your house as well. It was very clear throughout the end of the series that the Malfoys were terrified to have their home annexed to the Dark Lord. Honestly, I don't think they actually were prepared to have Voldemort come back into power, and it shows. Whatever Draco did do, he did under the threat of losing his parents and his own life, and no child should ever be forced to choose between their life and that of their family, who maybe they have a complicated relationship with, but ultimately they love. There's a common idea that while Harry was the boy who lived and the chosen one, Draco was the boy who didn't have a choice. He was raised to believe what his parents believed and ultimately was forced to choose between the death of his family and possibly himself and doing something it's very clear that he didn't want to do. And to be honest, I kind of have to agree. Draco may not have made the best decisions in a lot of cases, but I think he had the best intentions for what it was worth. My version of events of how things happened after the war, I like to think that Harry spent the summer going to therapy. Muggle therapy, if we're being honest, because it's kind of questionable what even magical therapy would be. And then he's able to return in the fall for 8th year, which is how he ends up running into Draco again, and he realizes that oddly, he was as much a constant in Harry's life as Ron and Hermione were. Sure, they've had a great deal of animosity, but considering Harry did try and kill him and then Draco saved his life, I feel like they could both agree that they're basically about even. They've both done a lot of soul searching over the summer, and they would be able to strike up a tenuous friendship. It isn't what either of them wanted or expected, but they realize that they understand each other in a way that few people in their lives can. Because at the end of the day, we know that however much the Malfoys may have loved each other, the one thing J.K. Rowling will actually give the family, I think it's safe to say Lucius was probably a bit of a tyrant and treated Draco at least as badly as the Dursleys treated Harry. Not to mention, while Harry was on the run from Voldemort, Draco was literally living with him in his house, and I think they'd be able to connect on how kind of dark that time was in their lives. It's definitely a slow burn, but eventually they start to realize that their friendship was more than they bargained for. Then, sometime during Christmas, let's say, they end up getting totally pissed together and make out. Or snog, excuse me. Next day, when they're sober and clearly hungover, they kind of feel really awkward about it. They don't know how to talk about it, but something's definitely changed in their friendship, and even their friends know something's up. And then, inevitably, they're forced together by their friends who maybe don't necessarily like the idea of them being together, but they can clearly tell something is up. they're meant to be, and they live happily ever after. Ultimately, I think J.K. Rowling does a disservice to the story by suggesting that Draco is undeserving of a proper redemption. It's lazy and boring, but I guess that's the reason why fanfiction exists, to give readers what the writer either couldn't or wouldn't give. A proper ending that is well-deserved after years and years of buildup and hope for something long denied to us. The end. That's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give me a like, comment down below, and keep the conversation going, and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to see further videos like this and just support me in general, please feel free to give to my Ko-Fi/Patreon. All the links will be in the description box below. Bye!